Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matthew Continetti, the Director of Domestic Policy Studies here at the American Enterprise Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to AEI. Last month, Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to Paris, France for an Artificial Intelligence Action Summit. And in his remarks, the Vice President urged his audience to think more about AI opportunity than AI safety. The Trump administration, Vance said, quote, believes that AI will have countless revolutionary applications in economic innovation, job creation, national security, healthcare, free expression, and beyond. And to restrict its development, the Vice President continued, would not only unfairly benefit incumbents in the space, it would mean paralyzing one of the most promising technologies we have seen in generations. Using the language of today's author, Vice President Vance came across as having a positive attitude toward AI, though we will leave it to Michael Rosen to tell us whether he is a positive autonomist or a positive autonomator. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Automatoner. Close enough.
Automatoner.
Close enough for government work.
Regardless, the debate over AI is not going away, and as America struggles to understand the implications of this remarkable technology, and if and how various levels of government should relate to it, I can think of no better counsel than Michael M. Rosen. Mr. Rosen is a non-resident senior fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute, where he specializes in intellectual property issues in the field of technology. He is a practicing trial attorney and the founder and principal of Rosen Technology Law. He also joined Irell and Manella as counsel in 2022. He previously worked as an attorney with Kobre and Kim in Israel and practiced patent law as a principal at Fish & Richardson, an intellectual property firm founded in 1878. He was also an adjunct professor at the University of San Diego School of Law. He has a JD from Harvard Law School and an AB in political science from Harvard College. His new book, like Silicon from Clay, What Ancient Jewish Wisdom Can Teach Us About AI, published today from AEI Press, develops a new framework for thinking about AI while applying lessons from the Jewish mystic tradition to the revolutionary change that surrounds us. I will talk with him for much of the hour before us, but I hope to leave some room for audience questions toward the end. Michael, it's very good to see you, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And last night, while I was pretty much unable to sleep, partly from excitement, a little bit of nerves, I was thinking just how much this, for me, my first time doing this, feels like my bar mitzvah all over again. And this is true in a few different ways, I think. First of all, this is the culmination of a tremendous amount of work and preparation and engagement with text, Jewish text specifically. That's first. Second, there's sort of a lead up to a performance where I have to take all the work that I've done and sit here now in front of you all and explain it in the course of 45 minutes to an hour, and kind of put that out there, and all the nerves and excitement and anxiety that comes with that. And then in addition to that, the fact that there are so many of my friends and family from different walks of life who are here and who are watching by live stream, it's very emotional and exciting. So, as is typical with a bar mitzvah, certainly a bar mitzvah speech, I wanted to start by welcoming and acknowledging people who've come from far and near to be here today. First of all, thank you very much to my good friend Matthew Weitzman, who came down from Philadelphia and braved the still celebrating Philly fans outside of 30th Street Station. Really appreciate you being here. From slightly farther away, my brother Rafi and my nephew Caleb, who came down and surprised me from Manhattan. It was really great to see you guys. My good friend and dear old friend Jeremy Schnittman, who came all the way from Silver Spring and from NASA, and Jeremy, really all three of you, Jeremy and Rafi and Matt, our discussions, whether it's over drinks in Tel Aviv or on the hiking trails or going running in different places about AI, have really been inspiring to me. Appreciate my colleagues from IRL who've come to visit and to listen in. You're not just my colleagues, but my friends, and I count myself very privileged to work with such talented people. Of course, I want to make sure to thank everyone at AEI who's been just so instrumental in making this a reality. So Kate and Owen and Jake Easter, we pulled out of retirement to come here today. I really appreciate you guys. You are the best research assistants anyone could ever ask for. Shane and Tony from the tech team, thank you so much for all of your support over the years and all of your help and advice in this process on the book. I want to also make sure to thank, of course, you, Matt, and Robert for those who don't know, Matt is technically my boss at the Institute, so I really appreciate everything you've done to make this a reality. No one's checking. Don't tell HR. And I also want to thank the book team, Sarah and Ian, Danielle and Jen, for all of your incredibly hard work on the book, and in particular, unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, Curtis Harrison, who is the best editor I could have ever asked for. And the media team, James and Lexi, you guys do a tremendous job. I really appreciate all your work too. Thank you for getting everything in. Oh, and another visitor I didn't mention came from even farther away. That's my good friend, longtime former partner, John Singer, came from San Diego. Really appreciate you and our conversations, especially after October 7th and everything we've talked about over that time. Did I forget anybody? I don't know. Oh, yeah, right. So one thing that's unusual about this particular bar mitzvah, well, in my original bar mitzvah, my own close family, my wife and my kids weren't even there. I mean, I thought we were close. That was strange. But they get a mulligan here. So I'm really, really so grateful that my wife, Deb, and three of my kids, Amalia, Ozzy, and Eitan, were able to make it in from Israel. For this, it just means the world that you were willing to get up and come out here. And each of you in your own way has really inspired me and inspired the work that I've done here. Amalia, from our discussions of different Jewish texts, from the Talmud all the way up to the TV show of Sunny and its AI chatbots, you've really helped me. And you've helped me also understand a lot of Gen Z slang, so that, let me see if I've got this right. I don't low-key sound like a mid-AI bet. Did I get that right? Okay, good. I practiced that a lot. Hopefully that makes sense. Ozzy, in particular, you're the power user of ChatGPT in the family, if you know what I mean, in high school. So those of you who have high school age kids may know sometimes maybe use it even a little bit too zealously. But I really appreciate the insights you've shared with me, as really you are the user in our family who understands it and has the most experience with it. So that's great. And Eitan, all of your discussions with me about the latest in AI technology and breakthroughs, in particular how it applies in the military, has been really, really super helpful. So I love talking about this stuff with you too. And Deb, va'ani tamid imach achazta biyad yamini. You were always with me, and you held my right hand. And it's not just a slogan from our wedding invitation. It's something that has gotten me through this whole process. Not only have you been with me through all the ups and downs of this process, and there have been many difficulties, and especially after October of 2023, but you've held my right hand and made me keep going and pushed me to be able to complete this project, and it really means the world to me. So thank you for being here. And I also, I remiss, I did not also want to recognize my friends from the Shepherd Park community, the Jewish community in Ohev Shalom, who are here, in particular Barry and David. Thank you guys for being here and for making me feel at home whenever I'm here in DC. And if I've left out others and those on the live stream, I apologize.
We'll schedule another event.
We're going to have to. This is why bar mitzvah speeches go on and on. You never get to the end of them. And just one last thing before we get started is this is my cousin Alon Ohel, and he has now been in captivity in Gaza for 515 days. And the last time that I was up here on this stage in November of 2023, He had been in captivity for about a month, and I dedicated my talk to him then too. He was 22, he's now 24, and my sincere hope is that we can bring him home and the other 58 hostages safely and completely and as immediately as possible. And with that, why don't we jump in and get started?
Absolutely, thank you. So I think I want to talk about how you came to write this book. I mean, one of the unique things about the book is its combination of high technology and ancient tradition. So we've had AI in various forms, very basic forms for about a decade. Then, of course, ChatGPT comes in November 2022 and really causes this revolution. When did you become interested in the topic, and what drew you to combining these two, at first seemingly disparate elements into one text?
So let me start actually with a story that I think crystallizes all of that. And if we think back to almost exactly 60 years ago today in the town of Rehovot in Israel. And at that moment, the Weizmann Institute of Rehovot, one of the major universities in Israel, though at the time wasn't so major, was inaugurating the second ever computer to exist in the state of Israel. And it was also one of the first computers to exist really anywhere. And what was so interesting about this particular event back then, this is again at the advent of computing, at the very beginning, the dawn of the computer age, and there was many, many questions about what computers were going to do, whether they were going to be beneficial or not. And the invitation for the person to deliver the invocation at this at the inauguration of the computer was not a computer scientist, although that word wouldn't have been used at the time. It wasn't a mathematician or an engineer or any sort of scientist at all. It was the Jewish history scholar Gershom Scholem from Hebrew University. And why was Gershom Scholem, this legendary scholar of Jewish mysticism, invited to talk? Well, because a few months earlier, he had nicknamed this fledgling machine the Golem of Rehovot. And in fact, his speech is really just totally remarkable, what he talks about the Golem there. It's reproduced actually in a late 60s issue of Commentary magazine, where you, Matt, are an editor and a regular contributor on the blog. And in that speech, we described this Golem of Rehovot. So why was he calling this a golem? Let me pause for one quick second. We'll come back to the golem in the big picture and get into all the details of it. But just to give you the overall 10,000-foot view of what a golem is, this is a creature that is created by humankind. It's instilled with some form of human intelligence. It's designed to do good things for the world. It is meant to be constrained by human beings and channeled in the right direction. And yet, inevitably, in almost every golem story, as we'll see, the golem goes haywire and decides to go out and destroy people, destroy things, create all sorts of trouble. So this was what Gershom Scholem saw in the power of the computer. He described the golem in his speech as a creature created by human intelligence and concentration, which is controlled by its creator and performs tasks set by him, but which at the same time may have a dangerous tendency to outgrow that control and develop destructive potentialities. So from the very beginning, we're talking about the outset of computer technology. There was both this hope and this fear. This hope that this machine could do wonderful transformative things, and at the same time, this deep fear that it was going to destroy everything. And to me, this story, 60 years ago, 1965, that this was going on, I found this profoundly influential in my thinking about these issues. It just seemed to me that you just literally have to replace the word computer with artificial intelligence. We would have the same challenges, the same discussions, and the same kind of debate that we're having today.
Well, maybe the golem is a good place to start. The way I read your book was it's very well structured, as one would expect from a lawyer. You begin with a framework for various ways that people approach AI. Then you shift to different paradigms from the Jewish tradition, from Jewish mysticism to understand AI. And then you go to policy. So maybe the place to begin is with the paradigms. Sure. And then we'll go to the framework before the policy. And the first of these paradigms is the golem. And so you have Sholem talking about the golem in terms of the computer. And how does that overlay on our debates with AI? Is that more of a warning about AI, that this human creation could eventually slip out of our control?
Absolutely. And you really see all of these elements. And I think the golem story is told in many different ways and in many different places. But there are certain themes that I mentioned earlier that come back over and over and over again. The first time that any sort of creature like a golem is mentioned is in the ancient Jewish text in the Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin, where there's a story told where Rava created a man. It literally says Rava created a man. And he brought the man to his mentor, and his mentor essentially freaked out and tried talking to this man, and it couldn't talk back to him, and he said, you need to destroy yourself. You're the product of humankind, and there's something unsettling about you, and you must be wiped out. And again, this comes up over and over and over again. But one of the things that I encountered that I found really striking is in a later medieval text, a text that's attributed to Rabbi Elazar of Worms. Worms was a town in modern-day Germany. And he's describing what the process is for training an AI. And it was truly amazing the way they describe this process. Again, this is about 1,000 years ago. And it is word for word, letter for letter, the way, not that I understand this because I'm just a caveman lawyer, but the AI technologists that I speak to, they agreed when I showed them this. It is the way that a training set is performed on modern day large language models. So the way that it describes is that you should take this man, which you form from clay, and you begin iterating the alphabet, and afterwards you iterate with all of the different letters and sounds, a, e, o, e, with the aleph. And then you move on to the bet, and then you move on to the gimel. And you're literally you're running these training sets on these machines. And so there was something, even from the very beginning, I see this, I'm like, wow, this is a really interesting connection between them. So that's sort of one thing. But another thing that comes up over and over and over again with the golem is that when you create the golem and when you program it, you must make sure that it's done in a proper way and is done for appropriate purposes. So a century later in Spain, Rabbi Avraham Abulafia is discussing how what you should and shouldn't do, how you should and shouldn't prepare the golem. And he describes it that if you pursue making this golem in order to operate corporeal issues for wealth or longevity, or for love or for hate, or to kill an enemy, or for your own glory, this man is wicked and a sinner. He's accursed and reviled and banished. So if you take this profound power to create a person, a machine, something that can transcend what humans can do, and you use it for evil purposes, for selfish purposes that are meant to harm rather than to help, that is deeply frowned upon. I mean, this is like biblical type of language. So from the get-go, the golem is something that has to be used for the good. It's very important that be the case. So this is and then we talked about the destructive power of the golem as well. So we'll get back to how we map that onto this different debate. But again, to me, the key takeaway, I think, from the golem stories over and over again is it's created in this tremendously creative and an inventive way. It needs to be done in an appropriate way, and we also need to make sure we impose some sort of restraints on it to prevent it from going off the rails.
Interesting. So the golem is not the only representation that figures into your narrative. There's also the Dybbuk. And first tell us what a Dybbuk is, and then also tell me how it factors into the plot of the Coen brothers movie, A Serious Man, before we get to AI.
Exactly. Yeah. So I strongly encourage the movie. It's one of their most thoughtful, I think, philosophical movies from 2009. And the opening scene features a golem, and I recounted in the book. It features a Dybbuk, and I talk about that in the book. But let me just explain the basics of what a Dybbuk is. And this is, for those who are unfamiliar, it's essentially a demon. It's a spirit, and it's a malevolent spirit that possesses people and causes them to act out in inappropriate and destructive ways. And on the surface, it's sort of the opposite of a golem, in the sense that the golem is a supernatural creature created from clay, created from different substances, and becomes this sort of power with superhuman strength. But it is created with human intelligence. It has human intelligence inside, whereas the Dybbuk has the physical shell of a human being, but there is supernatural spirit inside of it. But at the same time, there is something still, I think, similar in certain ways about the Dybbuk. This is a force, the Dybbuk, that infected Jewish communities mostly in Eastern Europe during the medieval and early modern times, but also Jewish communities in North Africa and the Middle East. And what would typically happen is someone would be possessed by this Dybbuk, what we would now, I think, probably fairly refer to as some sort of mental or emotional illness that they're suffering. But at the time, we didn't have those terms. Psychiatry and psychology weren't where they are at this point. And what this type of spirit would create in this person some type of wrongdoing. It might be sexual impropriety. It might be some kind of financial wrongdoing. They might go to take some sort of murderous or physically dangerous type of approach. And the community, the leaders in this community, would take that spirit, would take this phenomenon and exorcise it from the person, but they would do it in a very, very public way. And why did they do it in a public way? Because the whole point of this exercise was to take this type of inclination that people have within them, that they are literally possessed by, and flush it out and make it clear to the congregation, to the community, this is not appropriate. We need to get rid of this. This is something that is within you that we need to put an end to. I think nowadays we would understand, again, that this is some sort, there isn't literal possession by a demon, right? This is some sort of inclination within a human being that needs to be cured and needs to be ousted. But the point is that we have within us this potential to do bad things that we need to make sure that we get rid of.
And so in the AI context, the Dybbuk is an inclination toward evil in the model? Is that?
Yes. So here, and I think it might be helpful to kind of frame the models or the different schools of thought on AI that I've laid out, and we can come back to the Maggid. Well, let me just sort of finish up. The Maggid, on the other hand, is the Dybbuk's friendly cousin, is what I call it. It's what we might refer to as a muse, right, or an inspiration, where sometimes you get in the zone when you're writing, or you're doing something athletic, or you're just somehow excelling at whatever it is you do. There's something within you that just inspires you. And this idea of the Maggid comes from the 16th century, also from Spain, Rav Yosef Caro, who is the author of the first codification of Jewish law, or modern codification of Jewish law, a true genius in terms of Jewish scholarship. He claims to have been possessed by a Maggid, by this muse that caused him to do great things. And of course, again, in modern terms, we would not understand this as something necessarily supernatural. Instead, what we would say, this person has been drawing out their muse, their inspiration, from something profound within them. They're channeling the best of what they have within them to benefit others, right? To write this tremendous work of scholarship that to this day, Jewish communities or observant Jewish communities observe. So that's the Maggid. So how does this fit in? So where you asked me where I started with this, and that Gershom Scholem story from 1965 is a key point. But maybe taking a more secular approach to this, I've just growingly become frustrated with the nature of the debate over artificial intelligence in contemporary society. It's just become so polarized, and it's gotten to the point where there are different schools of thought and different approaches that are just talking completely past each other. And I found it very dispiriting, because this technology is, I think by all accounts, very important, and it points the way toward very significant developments in the future, and yet we can't seem to coalesce around basic principles to hold things together. And I classified essentially 4 groups of approaches, 4 different schools of thought to approaching AI. And one of these divisions goes along an x-axis, let's say, where on one extreme we have scholars, programmers, and policymakers who view the coming or even the existing AI technology as truly autonomous of their human programmers. I call this the autonomists, meaning they believe that there is something profound that has happened even recently, maybe starting in late 2022 with the advent of GPT 3.5, which we call ChatGPT, but maybe earlier or maybe later. But we're getting to a point where these systems are in some important way autonomous of their creators. On the other hand, we have those who believe that, no, that's not the case. In fact, these systems are what I call automatons, right? Which literally means robot, but in this sense, it means they are just doing what they're told to do. They are glorified word processors that perform the tasks that they are told to perform. And there's a profound gap between these different schools, but then there's yet another kind of dividing line.
Before you get to the other dividing line, just when we talk about AI, we talk about there's generative artificial intelligence, right? But then there's also general artificial intelligence.
Right.
And it seems to me that the autonomous camp, they think that's where we are headed or close to already, right?
Definitely.
An intelligence that is in many ways sentient, self-conscious, and independent of its human masters. Whereas the figures who are the automatonamists.
Close enough, yeah.
Okay. Maybe by the end of the hour we'll get there to the correct pronunciation. They're more of the kind who say that at the end of the day, there was always going to be an off button, right?
Right. I think that's fair to say.
Does that correspond with kind of how you think about it?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And what you're referring to, this artificial general intelligence, this is the point. There are various definitions in the field, but I think generally speaking, what it means is the point where machines will be able to do a majority of the tasks that humans can currently do at or exceeding the level that we currently do them at, right? Mm-hmm. So I think according to most scholars in this field, we're not there yet. But the autonomists certainly think that we will get there very soon, whereas the automatoners essentially think we'll never get there. Right. And within that, there's also a valence, a y-axis. Right. And on this y-axis, we have a value judgment based on each of these, right? So we have positive folks, positive autonomists and positive automatoners, and then negative autonomists and negative automatoners. And just to cover those very briefly, the quintessential positive autonomists, these are the AI cheerleaders that we hear about all the time. OpenAI, Sam Altman, Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz, folks who think that AI is becoming tremendously powerful and autonomous, and it's great, and the future is going to be amazing. The negative autonomists, on the other hand, they agree that AI is becoming all-powerful, and maybe we're headed toward AGI, or general intelligence soon, but it's a disaster, and it's deadening the human spirit, and it may actually wind up killing us all. And you literally have some of these activists in Time magazine writing, we need to shut down all of these servers, and if necessary, we need to carry out a nuclear airstrike on these servers to knock them out right now, like literally right now. So some of this is very fringe, but Time magazine, I think, is a relatively...
This idea that AI will lead to the extinction of humanity.
Correct.
That's the negative autonomous.
Exactly. The phrase that they like to use is it will turn us all into paperclips, meaning the minute that you program a machine to optimize paperclip making, it will eventually turn everything into a paperclip.
And so who's a positive automatoner?
So on that side of the ledger, we have folks who believe that there is great benefit in AI, but ultimately it's just a product of ourselves. We only get out of it what we put into it. And it will never, these machines will never transcend what humans are and what humans do, but there's still great value in doing that. And therefore, we need to make sure that if you get garbage in and garbage out, well, let's not put garbage in. Let's program these things to reflect the very best of us. And then the last quadrant, right, are the negative automatoners. And these are folks who also agree with the positive automatoners that this technology is, it's impressive, but it's not AGI. We're not getting anywhere deeply profound. And it's actually very bad because it's just creating schlock upon schlock. Mm-hmm. It's deadening our spirit, and it's taking us in a direction where we're just copying and engaging in all those sorts of things.
So Elon Musk would fall.
So he's an interesting character for many reasons, and it's certainly an interesting time to be in Washington and talk about Elon. But Elon, I think, was initially very skeptical about AI and has even expressed, and I quote him in the book, has expressed his thought that AI will one day destroy us all. But he's kind of come and gone over time, and he's had this on again, off again feud with OpenAI, which he helped found, and now it seems like one of his mortal enemies, among others, is Sam Altman, the founder of and CEO of OpenAI. So he's a little bit hard to place, but there definitely is that sentiment from him and from others like him that this is just. It's not a direction we want to go in. It's bringing out the worst in us.
So let's bring these two kind of maps or images together then. How does this axis you've described fit with the figures from the Jewish tradition?
Right. So essentially, if I had a whiteboard, which I like to do, also a patent lawyer typically loves to work with whiteboards. What I would map the positive autonomists field, right, the OpenAI field. I would put the Golem in that field because the idea is we're creating this super powerful creature that can do amazing things and is capable of transcending what its creators, what its human creators put into it. I would put that in the positive autonomist field. In the negative autonomist field, I would also put the Golem, or what I call in the book, I have a separate chapter, and thank you to my brother-in-law, Jesse Kellerman, for suggesting this. I call him the Golem gone bad, right? Because this is almost an independent type of version of the Golem, where he really does go crazy. And unfortunately, that's the case in most of the Golem stories. So
that's Frankenstein's monster.
It is, right? And that's, as I reflect in the book, there are, Frankenstein is a typical case of that. There's a play from the 60s called R.U.R., a Czech play. Not surprising that it's Czech because many of the most famous Golem stories come from Prague. The Golem of Prague is thought of as the most famous one. But that talks about these robots that go crazy in a factory and end up wiping out all of humanity, and it's where the term robot comes from. It's a Czech word that was created in that play. So it's not just the Golem. There are all these.
And you have some fantastic examples, of course, of AI bots who try to convince their interlocutors that they're in love, or sometimes AIs who try to convince the person they're talking to that it's time to consider suicide, something like this, right?
Yeah.
That is kind of the the golem gone bad.
There is a lot of that, unfortunately, and right now it's on a scale that seems manageable. But even something as seemingly benign, there was I think it was ChatGPT managed, or maybe it was GPT-4 managed to convince it defeated a CAPTCHA. Right, we all get those annoying CAPTCHAs to prove that you're a human when you have to click on a website to get through things. In fact, I think it's possible that AEI has it on its websites too.
How many traffic lights are in this picture?
Exactly, right? So what did this chatbot do? It may have been able to figure out where the chatbots are, but instead what it did was it enlisted a human being through the website TaskRabbit. It enlisted a person, it engaged them online, it convinced this person that the chatbot was human and was blind, was visually impaired, and therefore it couldn't complete the CAPTCHA. So it managed to hire this human to complete the CAPTCHA for it, right? So these are sort of little devious things, but they matter. But just to complete the quadrants, and so then the positive automatoner box, that's where I would put the maggid, because what we're talking about here is this power, this inner power that we get out of this what we put into it, that our machines reflect who we are. And if we are empowered and we're channeling the good aspects of us, this maggid, this inspiration, this flow feeling, right? If we're channeling that in good places, then even if this is a glorified word processor, we're going to get good word products out of it. And then the flip side, the negative automatoners is where I would put the Dybbuk, right? It's this sense that we're just poisoning the well with our worst instincts. We're making things bad for ourselves and for the future. And there's no way out of it, according to this view.
So just to maybe attach some more concrete examples, when you're speaking of the maggid and the positive automatoners, I couldn't help thinking of the presentation that the NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang gave earlier this year, where if you watch it, he described this future where agentic AI is powering fleets of robots in factories doing manufacturing work, and self-driving cars are spiriting us from our homes to our places of employment or schools. Is that kind of what you're saying, that we're going to be inspired and create this more uplifting future that at the end of the day will service humanity?
Very much so. And part of my research for the book took me to Japan, which is a society that is much farther advanced than we are in the US or even in Western Europe or in Israel when it comes to robotics. And the view that I received from many of the folks there was really this quintessential positive automatoner view. They're positive about these things. They're not worried that AI is going to destroy the world, but they're not convinced that the robots that they deal with are in some way transcending their programmers, right? They're very important. They use them for all sorts. Anyone who's been to Japan knows just how automated everything is there in so many different ways. And they're using them in really innovative ways when it comes to senior care and healthcare in general, janitorial services, all sorts of manufacturing, everything in a much more profound way. But still, the sense I got from most of the folks I talked to is that this isn't technology that is some sort of super brain that's going to take over, whether for good or for bad. But there's plenty of good potential there.
And then just to wrap up, the Dybbuk that's taking from us, draining us, is that what we should think of when we hear terms like brain rot or slop? I think is the term just to describe just this kind of endless parade of images that are repetitive and uncreative, and then of course the just general deadening effect that the internet has in our minds.
Absolutely. I think brain rot might have been the dictionary word of the year of some sort, and it's also part of the Gen Z slang that I'm supposed to be mastering. And yeah, absolutely. This comes up in a few different ways. I spent a good amount of time speaking to a really interesting neuroscientist named Eric Hoel, who's very generous with his time. And he's been very critical of AI, not because he thinks it's going to destroy the world, but because as a creator, as a thinker, and as a writer, and a philosopher as well, he's worried that it's going to cheapen and deaden our ability to think for ourselves. This comes up in the legal realm as well, as I've spoken at my firm about and written about for AI. There are all sorts of lawsuits against ChatGPT and similar chatbots and LLMs for copyright infringement. The New York Times, other different newspapers, creators, writers, John Grisham and all these sort of thriller writers, they're concerned that ChatGPT is just churning out copies and worse copies of what it is that they do. And OpenAI, for its part, is saying, no, that's not at all the case. We are creating something that transcends what we put into it. We're creating a version of work that is a la John Grisham, right? Or it's written in the style of the New York Times, but we're not regurgitating word for word what goes into it. So I think there you really have this, this upper right and lower left, or well, however you look at it from your perspective, kind of dispute over all that. But yeah, I think that is the Dybbuk rearing its head, and it's I think a justified fear on the part of creators and inventors that there will be widespread copying of this technology, and we need to make sure that we're channeling our maggid and not our Dybbuk when it comes to
right.
that.
So, I mean, in one sense, fusing these two traditions together helps us understand that the problems generated by the advent of AI are not really new, right? I mean, they're moral problems at the end of the day, and it has to do with how we approach the technology or how we allow the technology to deal with us. So then the question arises, how does this come to policy? What does this mean for Washington, D.C.? After you've researched and written this book, what would your advice be to policymakers? What part of the quadrant, what part of the Jewish tradition should they be aiming for?
So it is absolutely a moral question. I think that's very, very well put. And it's critical that we keep our moral caps on when we're thinking about developing these policies. So the policy cap and the moral cap have to be worn at the same time. So what I lay out in the book are four key principles that need to be articulated. We obviously don't have time to get into all of them in detail, but just to lay them out, and you'll all have a chance to get copies and read about it in more depth. The first one is, and this is, again, these are both policy and moral, I would say, imperatives. The first is technology is deeply valuable and absolutely should be encouraged and welcomed. And the type of technology we're developing when we build AI comes from a very human urge, a fundamentally human desire to improve the world, to extend and enhance life for everyone. And we should welcome that. We should encourage it, right? We should be positive about what it is that we're able to create because there is tremendous potential for it. That's point number one. Point number two is that when we do this, when we build our machines, when we build our robots, we need to do so with a sense of responsibility, with a sense that this is something we're doing not for ourselves or not only for ourselves. It's okay to do so in a profitable way, right? Companies need a motive to create, but we need to do it for the greater good of society. And there needs to be some level of constraint on these companies, on these big tech companies as they're developing these major systems. My view, which I get into and which my colleagues at the Tech Policy Center have written extensively on and testified on Capitol Hill about in great detail, is that many of these sort of one-size-fits-all, top-down executive orders and EU directives, hundreds of pages long, laying out these very uniform kind of straitjacketed regulations for everyone, is not the right way to go. Not only because it's insensitive to the differences between companies, it's liable to regulatory capture, right? Where, in fact, it's not surprising that some of the biggest companies in the world, Microsoft and Meta and Google, in many ways they want to be regulated because it may keep out other competitors. So I think what I argue for is some form of rigorous, voluntary, industry-based type of coalition standards that hold all of these AI makers to the same standard. That's point number two. Point number three, here's sort of the automaton Maggid and Dybbuk hat comes out here, is we do need to make sure that we're programming these things with the best of intentions in mind. And there have been all these other type of horror stories about how some of these systems early on were developing, were outputting the most blatant, awful, racist, misogynistic kind of output that just really kind of surprised everybody. And then the thing swung in the total other direction. Some of you may remember a year ago, Gemini, Google's image generation software, started putting out these kind of nonsensical images of black Vikings or sort of things that just kind of didn't make sense and were the product of a whole different set of assumptions. We need to try to strip out our narrow ideological biases from programming these things and make sure that they operate and capture really the best of us. Fair, simple, and really the good side of what we do. And then the last thing, which I'll leave you with, and then I guess we're ready to maybe take some questions, is we do need to beware of the golem gone bad. And there is a chance, in my view, and I'm not a computer scientist, I can't say this with any certainty, I think it's a very small chance. But there is at least some potential for some type of major disaster, some type of apocalyptic result coming from exponential growth of these machines. And we need to guard against that. We need to make sure that there is some sort, in some way, some type of kill switch that can be built in. With the story with the golem, the famous story of how the golem is defeated or is deactivated in the end, it's a really kind of nice story. There are a few different versions, but my favorite one is that when the golem is created, it has 3 letters stamped across its forehead, 3 Hebrew letters, Aleph, Mem, and Taf. And that spells the Hebrew word emet, or truth. Okay? And this again goes with this theme of when you create the golem, it needs to be done for the right purposes and in the right way and to serve the values of truth and all that. In order to deactivate the golem, when the golem would go bad, what its masters or its creators would do was erase the aleph from the forehead. So now there are only 2 Hebrew letters left, mem and taf, and that spells the word met or dead, right? So it goes from truth to dead. And it is the early modern version of what we call a kill switch, right? An on-off button. And in my opinion, we need to make sure that there is some sort of on-off switch, some kind of kill switch that's built into the AI that we develop. And it's not that far-fetched. There are both companies and in academia, they're working on kind of mechanisms for doing that. In some ways, it's as simple as pulling a plug if you need to. But we do need, as a society, to be aware of all that.
Well, just before I turn to the audience, I want to just get your reaction. So on the 3 things you laid out, I mean, how are we doing? Are there industry standards being formulated?
There are, and one of the things I get into in some detail in the book, and just make sure I have all the different companies right here, is that there are a couple of groups that I think are very promising. One of them is called the Partnership on AI. This is an alliance of big companies, just to be clear, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Google, Microsoft, IBM, and they're working together to formulate their own standards that they will abide by and will try to administer in a fair way. Again, those are big companies. There's another group called the AI Alliance. This is a partnership not only of some of those big companies that I mentioned, but also academia. Dartmouth and NYU are part of this. Smaller startup companies are part of it too. And they're working to try to formulate policies and guidelines that will both restrain but also encourage the development of AI. And that was why you began your remarks, Matt, with the reference to J.D. Vance's speech in Europe. This was the less noticed of J.D. Vance's 2 speeches, right, in the vice president's speeches in Europe. This one, I think, I was very, very pleasantly surprised by. But there he really argued for making sure we spur and generate AI activity, but do so in a way that benefits a wide variety of people.
And it seems as though the Trump executive order on AI seems to go in that direction as well.
Correct, and there I was encouraged by the new administration's almost immediate reversal of the Biden executive order, which again I thought was just way too one size fits all, top down. There isn't exactly a policy yet for the new administration. I think they're working on it. Like everything with the new administration, I think we want to encourage them to go in the right direction and make wise decisions. But early reviews so far seem to be, I think, positive of where they're going with it.
Great. Well, we do have time for one or two questions from the audience. So if you would please raise your hand, we can get the microphones if there's any. Right there. Jake. Just to introduce yourself and your affiliation, and please put your statement in the form of a question.
Hey, Michael. It's Jake Easter. I'm with the Senate Help Committee. I cover AI and education technology. One thing that's cropping up in discussions on the Hill right now is, whether or not the open source version of artificial intelligence should be hoisted up as equal or preferable to closed source proprietary models. And I'm curious how the open source proprietary divide tracks onto your or maps onto your theory here.
Sure. No, it's a great question. And I mentioned Jake before. He was really instrumental at the very outset and for most of my work on the book until he abandoned us and decided to go up to Capitol Hill. Yeah, so I think I'll answer your question by maybe reframing it in a slightly different way, because I'm a lawyer and that's what I do generally. We did see, and you alluded to this too, Matt. We saw about a month ago the explosion on the scene of DeepSeek, right, which is the Chinese version, in some ways, of ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and other LLMs, and the DeepSeek itself is an open source type of program. And for those who don't understand, open source, closed source, essentially they're turning over the algorithms for the most part so that the public can see how this stuff operates. And DeepSeek, for those who aren't aware, has really made this incredible splash on the scene. It purported to do what all of these long developed and expensive and computationally demanding LLMs can do, but at a fraction of the cost and at a fraction of the compute as well. And I think those claims are still being tested. It's only been about a month since it's been around, so it's not exactly clear if they're living up to their promise and what they said that they're doing. But if it's even close to true what they said that they've been able to do and what they seem to have been shown to do, this seems like a very promising type of path. So I think the jury is still out. Sam Altman himself, the OpenAI CEO, said he said something like, "This was the biggest mistake that we made, was keeping our algorithms closed and not opening them up to others." As a patent lawyer, I tend to like closed source software more than open source. That's just me. Generally, it makes me a little bit nervous to have all that out in the world. But if they're able to do that and succeed with it, then and at again a much cheaper and more effective way to spread it. If we can set aside also, of course, we need to concern ourselves with security concerns and whether this data is making its way back to unsavory the regime in Beijing. Putting that to the side, then I think it's encouraging.
Maybe one more question here in front here. The microphone's coming.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a past chairman of the Robotics International section of Washington Society of Manufacturing Engineers. And I wonder what future you see in manufacturing.
So thank you very much. And I'll note that my son here was my son Eitan was a robotics champion, the Lego first, robotics championship in Tel Aviv in the Menorah Miftachim arena 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. So appreciate that. Yeah, so I think the manufacturing realm, for me, going to Japan and seeing how it's used there, was deeply impressive. And I think that there's a real possibility that type of innovation can be brought to the U.S. as well. I think it's in keeping with the AEI spirit for me to say that, of course, we all worry when jobs, especially good, well-paying, white, blue-collar or even gray-collar type of jobs might be potentially eliminated by this type of technology. How do we approach that? And I think we approach it with a level of both humility and encouragement. We want people to move up the value chain, right? To be able to continue to contribute and have meaningful employment experiences in ways that are enriching. We also want to encourage technology to happen, and if that requires retraining the population, engineers to become those who work with the robots or program the robots, right? That can be really rewarding work as well. So I think it's tricky, and the vice president alluded to this in his speech as well. We want to make sure that AI works for workers. But in the long term, we need to, my strong feeling is the solution is we want to try to help these workers become even more productive workers in a different way.
Yeah, it's also striking that this AI and robotics revolution is happening at the precipice of a demographic crisis throughout the Western world. And so we're going to reach a point where we need workers. We clearly have reached a point in our politics where immigration wants to be regulated. And so these robots may come at exactly the right time to help fill some of the jobs that we just will not have the people to do.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right, Matt. It's in particular in Japan, which has a much more severe demographic crunch than we have in the U.S. That I think is an important reason why they've moved so much in that direction of automation.
Is there one question over on this side? I'm all for equity here. Well, you're kind of in the median, so do you have a question? Yeah, just raise your hand. She'll get you.
Thank you. I'm also Matt. My question for you is, I love the schematic that you have, the Dybbuk, the Golem, the Maggid, all of these different things that AI could be, but I guess different models of AI and different purposes that we put it towards might represent different things. And one area I'm thinking about a lot is national security and the idea that we might set these AI golems against each other in military applications. Is this an example of a good golem defending us, or a golem gone wrong to engage in violent ends? And are we concerned that different models might end up in a different place? Some might bring out the best in us, some might bring out the worst in us. And in that case, who wins in a fight, a Dybbuk or a Maggid?
Right. Great question. I think about this question a lot, actually. And you see the way that, in particular in the conflict in the Ukraine, but also in Israel's war against Hamas, you see increasing use of drones on both sides, right? And it just makes me think that one day war will just simply be fought between drones entirely. It will just be robots fighting other robots and yet more robots trying to shoot down the robots that are out there. So it's hard to know if that is something that is is necessarily good or bad, or is it just sort of amoral? I'll note that the quote that I mentioned earlier from Rabbi Abulafia in Spain, he said that it was inappropriate. You would be accursed and reviled and banished if you used this golem to kill an enemy. But at the same time, if our enemies want to kill us, then it's not, I believe it's fundamentally not inappropriate to use whatever technology we can to fend off that type of battle. So I don't know that there's a clear-cut moral judgment one way or the other when we set robots against each other than to say if it means that fewer humans get killed, then that's probably a good thing.
Well, it's time to hit the kill switch on this panel discussion. But I would like to invite you all to join the conversation afterward. Michael's been generous enough to sign some books, and you can ask him any questions you have then when you meet him. And otherwise, just please join me in congratulating him on this excellent text. Thank you.